into the plan, I'll just kind of frame up like why this plan and why now. We started this plan prior to the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic in February of 2020, when the world looked quite different. At that point, we understood the need for a comprehensive and holistic economic development strategy for Ramsey County Community and Economic Development, who has been kind of a not super active player in this space, and with updated data analysis to really understand the state of the Ramsey County economy within the region, and then also in the context of the affordable housing crisis that predated COVID. And the county is really in this process trying to understand our unique role. We're not trying to replicate what other governmental agencies are doing at the state level or the city of St. Paul, but to identify existing gaps and the places where counties can play a role and be able to be collaborative with chambers, local businesses, units of government, and so on. And then it was also really imperative for us to center this effort within the frame of economic inclusion, building on the Ramsey County Board's longstanding commitment to racial equity. And I'm really grateful, excuse me, to have Devana here today to help share kind of telling this story. So about the planning partnership, of course, we had involvement of hundreds of, if not, thousands of community residents, different community-based organizations, small business owners. We were able to engage folks who received small business relief to kind of help inform our thinking as we went through the process. And then we had a team of really expert consultants to guide us. Fourth Economy and MZ Strategies, who led the housing and economic analysis. CEI, and who's represented here today by Devana, who was our strategic advisor and really helped bring the equity framework lens to our work and to help us with implementation. NAO Partners, who focused on community engagement, and Urban 3, who did a fiscal health analysis. And again, I've already talked about this, but quickly our work was dramatically influenced by 2020, first the COVID pandemic and the economic impacts of that, and then the killing of George Floyd and the profound impact on our community and our nation and the world. But again, the racial disparities that they predated this. And so you see a great quote from Tawana Black about how we just have to be really clear and upfront, understanding that we've not been keeping pace. And the time for like admiring the problem and describing the problem is long since past. We really need to be bold and be thinking about action. And some of the hallmarks, I'm going to just touch on a couple of data points as we go through, but the wage gap and the wealth gap are absolutely critical to all of our communities, but also our county and our region. And without addressing those pieces, we really can't move forward, as well as the need for businesses to be able to find enough workers. It's all interconnected. And these are critical pieces of having a functioning economy and a competitive economy. Two data points that I wanted to highlight are first, that we aren't keeping pace in Ramsey County on minority business enterprises, which is kind of an appalling thing to realize, because we are such a richly diverse community, but we are not keeping pace within the metro area, within the state or the national average. So that's something that this plan can try to focus on. And then also thinking about housing as economic infrastructure. And as of last year, we had a current deficit of 15,000 units of deeply affordable housing to address the needs for those that are most severely impacted by that. And it's all interconnected. I'll talk more about housing in a moment. So this led us to a holistic plan with sort of two buckets of strategies. I'm going to talk about the first four strategies that relate to place-based inclusion and creating resilient and equitable communities. And Devana will walk you through the second set. So back to a little bit more data before we get into the strategies themselves, a couple of housing points that I think I did not understand this well. I'm not a housing person. I'm a little bit more of a generalist. And so I mentioned the 15,000 units as a current deficit of deeply affordable housing, but we also have a lot of unsubsidized units scattered throughout our region. And here's what it looks like in Ramsey County. The dots represent different units that in most cases, these are buildings that were built, 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. And they are, in some cases in need of repair because they have become substandard. They are the most affordable units that don't have a government subsidy of any kind. So here in this metro, we call them naturally occurring housing units, and they do tend to be often concentrated in high frequency transit corridors. So that total is 10,000 units. Those are also really vulnerable to pressures from the market to upgrade or gentrify. And so if we lose these, it just compounds that affordable housing picture.
Hey, Martha, can I ask a question quick?
Absolutely.
How is deeply affordable defined?
Perfect. Yeah, so if you see at the bottom of this slide, it's talking about 30% of AMI. So that's area median income. And you can see, that's a four-person household is cost burdened if the monthly rent exceeds $775. And, as we know, there aren't many of those units around. There are some, let's see, we do have some 30% AMI units that are not subsidized out there, believe it or not a lot. And I don't have that number committed to memory, but we have a lot in the 50 and 60% of AMI level, and then some at the 80% of AMI level.
Could I also ask a clarification? You said 15,000 is the gap units, 10,000 are NOAA units. That means is the gap 5,000 then?
No, it actually means 15,000, that only having a gap of 15,000, that number is propped up by the fact that we have some NOAA units out there at all levels of AMI. And if we lose, let's say tomorrow, all of these 10,000 units convert to much higher market rates with granite countertops and exercise rooms, it's going to just apply more pressure so that, folks are having to move into higher level of rent and be more cost burdened. Yes, I see Bruce nodding his head. That makes sense. So just a bit more on when we talk about cost burden, HUD's definition is a household that's spending more than 30% of their household income on rent. And you can see that at the lowest levels of area median income, that's where that pressure is particularly acute across all races, but certainly within our communities of color. I'm going to pause for a moment so Devonna can talk to you about just racial discrimination in housing and how that has contributed to this crisis.
Thank you, Marcia. The county has done a lot of work to look at the history of redlining and solutions for combating that history. Prior to the 1968 Fair Housing Act, there were no laws that protected minority populations from discriminatory practices. And I'm sure many of you already know a lot about this history, but we're just kind of putting it out there to center us in this conversation. Racial covenants were clauses that were embedded into property deeds to prevent people who were not white from buying or occupying parcels of land. So many stories of how Black families across the country fell victim to these racist laws and actions are now being uncovered. In the Twin Cities and across the country, redlining has prevented people of color from moving into neighborhoods and accessing financial support for housing. We cannot even begin to quantify the implications of that. But what we do know is that the impacts of redlining are far beyond what we can even see, and that the negative impacts continue to hinder wealth building in detrimental ways. In the Mapping Prejudice session, some of you have already seen that on April 8th, Ramsey County revealed a preliminary racial covenant map along with historical research, which you can find on the Ramsey County website. And this was not just a St. Paul phenomenon, but we saw it specifically in Detroit, Oklahoma, and other communities where large Black and brown populations lived. The effects of redlining is finally now being thoughtfully addressed across the country, including in Evanston, Illinois, where they just approved a form of reparations to families whose ancestors were victims of redlining policies and practices. The recommendations that were made here in the plan include, as Martha stated earlier, the fiscal health analysis to help inform recommendations when we think about how to leverage the opportunities here in St. Paul and Ramsey County. Back to Martha.
Thanks, Tivana. And you're seeing a St. Paul map here, but we do want to note this is not just a Central City phenomenon, and there is plenty of this history in the first and even second ring of Ramsey County. I want to just give a quick plug for the work of Urban 3, and my few words are not going to do it justice. If you go to the link that I shared under the tab called Fiscal Health, you'll see the full report from Urban 3. But this is a county-wide 3D valuation model that they created of value per acre. And so, as you see darker colored spikes, and the higher the spikes, it's correlated with higher density, higher valuation per acre, which in large part is a function of density. And so downtown St. Paul, of course, is very fiscally productive, as is a lot of St. Paul. It's kind of hard to see on the visual here. It kind of looks at first glance like the suburbs are just far behind, but in fact, we find in along corridors like commercial corridors, or in downtown White Bear Lake, where there's a concentrated commercial node, even our suburban communities can have these spikes of higher values. And sort of the takeaway is that in a densely developed county like Ramsey County, there's an opportunity for us to rethink land use in a way to boost fiscal productivity. I know St. Paul is wrestling with the question of parking, but particularly thinking about if there's excess surface parking lots, that's an opportunity to think about maybe different land uses. All right, so I'm going to move now into the first 4 strategies under place-based inclusion. And so the first strategy is really, as you can see, is related to thinking about increasing the supply of rental housing units for our lowest income residents. I won't read through it. This is, again, massive condensing some of the plan. I still won't read through it all because that's really redundant for you all, but there's a number of actions related to investing in that naturally occurring affordable housing that we talked about, so that affordability can be maintained and that those units are quality over time. And then investing in things like energy efficiency and weatherization, et cetera, energy investments that are climate resilient and also can drive down the cost of property ownership and rent for homeowners. And then the biggest piece is activation of the county's HRA levy authority, which will establish a dedicated fund that can support new affordable housing development and would provide gap financing. We're the only county in the 7-county metro that doesn't currently levy for housing. So it would put us on a little bit better par with our peer counties and help us be a better partner to cities that are trying to advance critical housing projects. Strategy 2 is, again, mostly focused on housing. Housing is economic infrastructure. And it's looking at uses for the new levy funds that the county will pair with other resources. Really, we're thinking about alignment and how that can happen. But there's also really some low-hanging fruit, some easy actions, like just making housing information more easily accessible to all residents, including non-English speakers and those with accessibility challenges, as well as exploring opportunities to partner with other communities and philanthropy to think about targeted investments to communities that have experienced historic wealth extraction through racially discriminatory housing practices. And the third strategy is more focused on equitable economic development within county transit and key commercial corridors, thinking about really directing investments in housing and jobs in a way that helps us prioritize and position key corridors. So in a lot of cases, it's transit and future high frequency transit corridors, but areas where there's already a lot of commercial development, such as the Midway is a premier corridor, of course, but wanting to target resources in partnership with our cities to make their projects as competitive as possible. And then the fourth strategy is more about supporting the needs of communities and really challenging the county to consider our role in partnership with localities to remove barriers to access to housing and jobs for all of our residents. And all of these actions would occur in partnership to help prepare sites to reduce the costs of development and ensure that development opportunities are inclusive. So that was really quick. I'm going to pass the baton now to Devana to take us through the last four strategies.
Thank you, Martha. She sets the bar really high because I still don't understand how she gets through all those slides so quick. So I'm going to do my best to be just as succinct. It's great to be here with you all. The Center for Economic Inclusion is proud to have partnered with Ramsey County to increase economic growth and competitiveness by placing racial equity and inclusion at the center. I'm going to touch on the next 5 to 8 strategies, but first I want to center the conversation and remind you that we have some major employers such as 3M and Medtronic, Boston Scientific, who have decided to make the county their home. And so we really want to take a deeper look at strengthening our tech capacity and taking a hold of that energy that those companies bring to the community. So they add new jobs and help to diversify the economy. Despite this growth, we know that Black, Latinx, and Indigenous businesses lack equitable investment. To realize the growth potential of business starts, Ramsey County must support the establishment and security of those communities. Next slide, please. In this slide, this is just a breakdown of the current condition, but we believe that Ramsey County has major opportunities to enhance business partnerships and support for small businesses. Ramsey County needs 500 more minority-owned business enterprises to match the U.S. ownership rate. And we believe that if Ramsey County seeded each of those businesses with $5,000, it will cost about $2.5 million per year, or $7.5 million at $15,000 each. If Ramsey County had the same rate of new businesses as the United States and seeded each with $5,000, it will cost about $6.2 million a year, and so on and so on. With that being said, a key recommendation is to expand the Open to Business program to accelerate entrepreneurship for immigrant populations. Again, this is such an abbreviated presentation, and for more information on the plan and to get a deeper insight, we definitely want to remind you to go and take a look at that full plan. Next slide, please. The live-work analysis on the right-hand side of this slide is included here just as an interesting fact about the people who live and or work in Ramsey County. And it shows that while 209,000 people live in Ramsey, only 260,000 people work in Ramsey, and 83,000 people live and work in Ramsey. Interesting fact, right? I think people really love to work in Ramsey. In estimating the need for higher paying wages, there is an untapped opportunity here. From a workforce perspective, we found that 36% of workers in Ramsey are being paid less than a living wage. A majority of Black residents are in jobs that pay less than a living wage, and that's a whopping 62%. The target in closing the wage gap would add $2.3 billion annually for Ramsey County. And I know those are a lot of numbers, but sometimes we think it's helpful for us to touch on those just to give you an idea. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I wanted to make sure I'm on the right slide here. These strategies will be important to achieve an economically competitive community. To meet the defined needs and advance opportunities for Ramsey County businesses and residents, the next 4 strategies that I'm going to talk about are prioritized. I'm going to break down, like I said, an abbreviated version of each. Again, in the essence of time, we're going to summarize a way that does not bring justice to the full plan, the recommended actions, or the work that has been done to accomplish the plan. Next slide, please. There are things that we can do that will make a difference in workforce recovery in terms of efforts to foster racial inclusion and equity for Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous, and people of color. To name a few, working in partnership with the Workforce Innovation Board to evaluate the impacts of workforce-related CARES Act investments, assisting workforce solutions to address targeted vulnerable populations, including folks who have been previously incarcerated, supporting Ramsey County to hire, retain, and promote Black, Indigenous, Asian, and Latinx employees in each department and at every level in pursuit of a workforce that mirrors the county's population and the diversity of the county and St. Paul. Also partnering with community-based organizations to prepare and equip employers in growth sectors to mitigate and dismantle racism and pilot new models for inclusive and equitable hiring. Next slide, please. Strategy 6 is really intentional about ways to develop entrepreneurial pathways. We believe that there's a growth opportunity here and potential that hasn't really been recognized, and believe that it will be to our advantage to focus on the lending gap. That means looking at private sector investments, lending practices, and spending. There's definitely purchasing power that exists in Ramsey that can be better aligned. A few ways to do that is by partnering with community leaders to influence and leverage private sector investments, and by engaging in efforts to scale effective, equitable supply chain strategies that are specifically aimed at increasing both spending and the net impact on increased family-sustaining jobs. I also want to remind you that though we might be talking specifically about recommendations for 2022, there are also key recommendations for 2023 and 2024. And in terms of strategy 6, the county also wants to explore a pilot program to create entrepreneurial startup spaces in suburban Ramsey, and also work alongside communities to identify spaces and feasibility. Next slide, please. The 7th strategy reminds us that in order to attract high-wage industry and lead with the spirit of innovation, the county has to set lofty goals. And we see this in a few of the recommendations listed here. This means increasing support for businesses and implementing unique ways to support the growth that we want to see in Ramsey County. Next slide, please. And the final strategy that I'm going to talk about seeks to strengthen and expand infrastructure to support communities. The metrics within this plan demonstrate the impacts that the plan will have as a result of efforts to support business attraction and growth. The plan also seeks to transform Ramsey County business ecosystem by igniting it not only with resources and support, by engaging partners and large businesses in these discussions, which is what Chad was speaking about earlier. The technical ideas here speak to business retention and expansion, and also enlarging the network of business advisors and advocating for small businesses and ethnic and place-based CDFIs. And finally, also providing businesses with culturally specific technical assistance and potential access to financial resources. And with that being said, that was a mouthful. I have cotton mouth now, and I'm going to pass it back to my incredible partner, Martha. You're on mute, Martha.
Thank you. Yes, the last slide we're looking at here, which looks a lot less beautiful than the ones we looked at before, was created by me, which tells you that I'm not a graphic designer, but we wanted to just capture again the stage that we're at. You've heard the vision, and now we have to pivot pretty quickly to kind of moving vision to reality. And this is just to kind of try to visualize the idea that we're taking these strategies, taking account of all of the existing funds that exist, thinking about funds that can be leveraged. The HRA levy definitely deserves its own kind of bracket. It's really an important part of funds that can and will be available, as well as thinking about kind of the extraordinary opportunity of the American Rescue Plan. Don't grill me, please, on how the American Rescue Plan might pertain here, because the guidelines, I think, were just released last week, and we are just trying to quickly, get our arms around that. But I think it's fair to assume that will funnel into this in some way. And then, working in partnership with organizations like the Chamber to think about building or retooling existing programs, leveraging partnerships, and potentially piloting projects that are along the lines of some of the things you've heard about. So, and this work, is really probably 3+ years of work that we'll be doing, but it does start now. And we're grateful to be able to talk to you about it today. Here again is our contact info, a long link to the plan. If you want to find the plan in the future and you don't know how to find it, you can simply Google Ramsey County Economic Inclusion Plan, and it should take you directly to the link. So thanks again. We're happy to chat with you about your reactions to what you heard.
Well, thank you so much, both Martha and Ivana, for the presentation. A lot of information in there for sure. And I know we're going to need to have more time to really, go through it. And I want to open it up to questions, but I want to lead it off quickly and say, it's, the plan is great. And then the next thing is, how does it get implemented? And you alluded to that a little bit, but I'm curious, who is the overseer of this? Is this something that gets presented on maybe a quarterly basis at the county commissioners meeting? Like, what is the end result on who is making sure that we're going along with our timeline and things are getting accomplished?
That's a great question, Chad. It's really a show me the money kind of, process. So it's really the roadmap for the Department of Community and Economic Development within the county, which as of today, we are a small but mighty team of 6. So that is, we're all kind of in our various lanes, but working in a collaborative manner. The way that the county is going to measure progress is, we have a process in Ramsey County where every other year we build budgets. And then in the even number years, we use these performance measures to kind of measure how are we accountable. So many of the actions in this will be integrated into our performance measures. And next year would be the first year we would be reporting on it. So, that's where the kind of official rubber hits the road accountability happens. But I think it will be visible in board discussion. I mean, I'm tuning in, the board's actually meeting right now. I almost can guarantee you they will reference this plan at some point in the morning. It's not, the county does many other things, but this is a key strategy, especially in terms of owning our share of housing and thinking about the linkage with economic development.
Great, thank you. So I want to open up to questions. Who's got any questions for them?
I don't have a question. I just want to compliment you in the county. I think this is an incredible document. I think it's a super important document, and it's really, really well done. And it resonates very much with the conversations that our board at the Chamber and our executive committee have been having on a monthly and a weekly basis. And I think it's fantastic. So with that caveat, I do have I have a couple questions. I don't want to dominate the discussion, but I think the most important question I have is, again, an implementation question. And there's $107 million of ARPA money coming into the county through the recovery funds. And I'm wondering if the county has started to think about how it's going to use that money to help implement this plan?
Yeah, that's another great question, Tony. Devon, I hope you don't mind. I'll take this one as well. So our board discussed when that number was known a couple weeks ago. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 weeks ago. But the desire on the part of the board is to transition, whereas the last big rescue package was really on emergency relief and COVID preparedness, to be able to, as much as is possible, to be using some of the funds to implement kind of bigger, longer range goals. And our county manager, mentioned affordable housing specifically. We want to be thoughtful about how we do that in a way that doesn't compete with the need for a levy, which is going to provide a sustained source of funding. This recovery money is helpful, but we know it's temporary. We assume there isn't more coming. So that is the strategy is, continuing to dedicate some resources to emergency relief, but as much as possible to kind of reserve a chunk for some of these longer range goals. And he had a good graphic that I don't know if I still have on my desk about, the different tiers. If you don't mind, maybe I don't know if I can put that. I don't know how to do that actually. So, but anyway, does that answer your question, Tony?
Yeah, I mean, I realize it's the money. I don't know if it's hit the county's coffers yet or not, but it came pretty quickly, and I'm sure there's a lot of discussions that need to be had at the board, I would assume, and in terms of how that money gets allocated. But it seems like it's a once in a not very often opportunity to leverage some federal dollars to execute a plan that to me absolutely needs to be executed. And so I don't see it much different than, $5,000 seeding a new business, got $107 million available to seed the economic development of the entire county. So I would encourage you to use that money as much as possible to leverage execution of this plan.
I actually did find the graphic and can share it. So I'm going to pop it up on screen real quick because I think it probably does a better job of describing and the answer to the question than I can do. So, this is the breakdown. I think this comes from the American Rescue Plan. This is kind of the prioritization of tier 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5. And, the county, this is a presentation from the county manager, is like invest as much as possible into tier 5, but make sure that tiers 1 through 4 are addressed through every means possible. We think we need to be really thoughtful and sensitive about that.
Do you have any sense for what dollar figures are attached to each of those tiers?
I'm sure that's known. And if my director, Carrie Collins, was doing this presentation, she happens to be on vacation and it's her first vacation in 2.5 years. So I'm thrilled to be here in her place. I can try to find that answer out, Tony, and relay it to Chad after the presentation. I would imagine there is some preliminary estimates there.
Thank you.
Great.
So
Other questions?
I have a question. So Martha, I've been involved with, low-income housing and affordability since the late 1980s. And I remember when there was collapse of nonprofit organizations doing housing. I helped establish an organization that's now one of the largest nonprofit providers of affordable housing in the Twin Cities. We leveraged and started, organizations like LISC and tried to work with corporations to sell, tax credits to raise money, all kinds of things. We have worked really, really hard, and a lot of people did, and we're still so far behind. So how realistic is this money really going to help? And I don't say that just because I don't think there's not enough effort behind it. I think because I just don't think we understand the magnitude of the problem. And so maybe I'm just out of step, but how realistically do we think we're going to be able to actually, have some success? Is it just a little around the edges, or are we really going to have some success? That's a question for measurement for me.
Yep, that is a very fair and very reality-based question. And it came up when we presented to the St. Paul Chamber, talking about, talk to me about what is the cost of a single unit of housing at 30% of AMI? What does that cost? How much? What do you think the money from the levy will be? And how do we break that down? So the levy, if St. Paul and the city of North St. Paul opt in, they're the only two communities in Ramsey County that had an HRA that predated the county's levy authority. So they do need to proactively opt in. We assume St. Paul will, but they're going through their due diligence. North St. Paul is a little bit more on the fence. The calculation is that communities that opt in will be able to have a share of those resources. So, you opt in, you have access to it. If both St. Paul and North St. Paul opt in, it's $11 million a year. And if affordable housing finance, that is only going to get you so far. It's a significant number and one that we can't bring right now, but it's not going to be able to solve the problem on its own. A friend of mine is in affordable housing, and I asked her what the average cost of subsidy was for a single unit of 30% of AMI housing, and she said it's north of $250,000 a unit, because you're basically buying down the cost of rents. And that if you divide that number into 11 million, you do not get many. You get a very small number of units on an annual basis. The idea is that we would not be solving the problem alone, but we would be another line in that sources, capital stack that developers put together, along with city funds and housing funds from Minnesota Housing, et cetera. And I realize my answer has been just related to housing, but it will provide an additional source of leveraging. So I'm not trying to duck your question. I'm trying to give you a real fair answer, but it's going to take time. But I think the realization on the part of the county is currently we are not at the table at all on this, and we need to be at the table to do our part, just like our peer counties.
No, that makes a lot of sense. There's a couple of things that I think get missed sometimes. I'm sure you've thought about it, but for me, when I'm doing affordable housing, is there are two components to success beyond just building an affordable house that someone can, occupy and live in. That is maintaining it over time, because we see they degrade very quickly. And I've been in many units that are long past needing to be upgraded of some kind, which breeds all kinds of problems in itself. And two is having strong on-site management that has social services attached to it, so that, that works. And how those two things get funded over the long term beyond just the initial development of the units, to me, is part of the success factor.
I just want to give a quick response. I know my colleague Max Holdhusen was brought over recently from the Housing Stability Office and are going to be helping with implementation of a lot of housing programs. And he is envisioning an implementation council to help provide feedback in real time. And so, that might be one place where the Midway Chamber chooses to engage. Maybe Russ, in his spare time, wants to be part of that process, so that we can be as smart as possible in implementation.
That's a really great idea. And then I just have one other quick question. I'm sorry, I don't mean to dominate either. And that is the kind of the huge disparity we have in housing with minorities and those with disabilities it's frankly kind of stunning to me half the time. And so how do we really, access those communities and provide, housing and the support we need to make sure that it's well integrated and we're, more of a seamless society?
Yeah, what is the answer to that question? I think it's it is definitely what is the frame for this plan, is that you can't just attack a societal problem in isolation. You really have to think about it holistically. So, we really, we touched briefly on workforce development. It's everything. It's ensuring that people have access to economic opportunity in terms of job and career advancement, being able to create small businesses. These are all means of creating wealth, but also helping alleviate some of the pressure on people's level of being cost burdened in housing, so that they just have additional economic opportunity. So that is the goal of this plan. And we'll see how we do over the long haul. It's a daunting challenge, but we're up for it.
In addition to that, Russ, I'll go back to what even Chad said earlier. The success of this plan is really going to be found in the co-partnerships with community and organizations like the chambers across the state, and making sure that we bring in voices of folks who actually are going to live in those units and who have lived in units just like that where we haven't been successful. And so we have to be very strategic about ensuring everyone is at the table who's going to make a difference in the successful plan and successful outcomes of the recommended actions in the plan.
So I really like that. I work in ILS and IHS services part-time, and there's a philosophy at DHS and a lot of these organizations called person-centeredness. I happen to find that in most organizations, that's just a marketing phrase. I think that person-centeredness is an appropriate approach, and we really need to make more of an effort to be person-centered, and having, individuals involved and at the table who are in these situations is really very important.
And also having folks, in these back rooms who have experienced homelessness or living in conditions that weren't always acceptable. And I think we have that on our team.
Great. Thank you.
Good question. Thank you.
I also want to share my appreciation for the plan and the work that went into the plan and the integration of community voices, and it's an exciting plan. I'm wondering whether there's some bridge documents between the St. Paul's comprehensive plan and the Ramsey County, because there are some possibilities of synergies, you talking about things in different ways. The other thing, and maybe it's in the document I haven't read, but I'm just having now just a pure what I call the ALANA focus, African, Latino, Asian, Native American focus. And your comment about the grants to businesses spurred some thinking that the old economic playbook for the ALANA communities are scattered investments, whether it's a grant program or it's an investment program, but it's scattered, it's not comprehensive. So it looks like there's another layer that needed, is a comprehensive wealth building infrastructure that, as Tony mentioned, now is an opportunity to fund that infrastructure, like different kinds of capital funds, alternative finance, business incubators, funds for pre-development kind of work. And it's an opportunity to do that. I'm not meaning to be critical, but the open to business, I'm not too confident that putting all the eggs in the open to business as the organization that's been serving open to business, because my personal experience of referring someone to seek help from one of the consultants is that these consultants are more based on their desk and not on the field. They don't actually go and walk with that business to say, hey, here's how you can get this resource. Here's how I'm looking out for you. It's like, hey, here, apply here, call here, right? So just to think about those implementation phases as you move is going to be very critical. But it's an exciting document, and I like the way the graphics, and I want to look at all that data on fiscal strength. You spurred a thought also about the fact that we have all these businesses here like 3M, and we've never really thought about them as Ramsey County and how they can be part of the solution. So that's a great kind of way to think. But thanks a lot for coming today too.
I just want to quickly add on to what Bruce said, and I think this I would love to have a further conversation between the chamber and the county and about strategy 6, entrepreneurship for Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous businesses. There's a lot of really exciting equity opportunities that are developing. Just last month, the Securities Exchange Commission just upped the regulation CF cap to $5 million. That's essentially the crowdfunding regulation that allows small businesses to be funded through. These aren't the Kickstarter campaigns where you give away your free beer in exchange for some money. This is a real securities offering. The limit on that until last month was $1 million. It just got up to $5 million. And I think I would love to hear a little bit, and I know we're short on time, but to talk more about specific ideas for implementing strategy 6 to create more capital availability for small businesses, for BIPOC businesses in Ramsey County, and obviously particularly we care about the Midway area as the Midway Chamber. So at some point it would be great to have a further conversation about ways that we can help collaborate with the county on those kinds of programs and creative programs with some of the tools that are available to us now.
Yeah, and I know we're running up against time, and I'd love to be able to react to what Bruce's great suggestions as well. But maybe in interest of time, I'll just say that, this is obviously not a one-off conversation. We've kind of shared this with you. It'll percolate some thought. Hopefully you see lots of areas of alignment between your own goals. And please feel free to contact, the center and the county to come back and talk about a specific strategy or specific actions. I mentioned our staff resources are really limited, so we're not going to be out proactively in every space that we want to be in, but please feel free to invite us back. We would welcome and encourage that kind of conversation. It's going to help us be more accountable to the plan.
Yeah, thank you so much. And the chamber, we're doing our annual board retreat in June, and it's usually a nice opportunity for us to look at the year ahead and what we want to accomplish, what our goals are going to be, the things that we're going to be reviewing at every monthly board meeting to see if we're doing our job or not. And I see some potential partnerships in here or some work that we can complement. And to Tony's point, strategy 6 is one that makes, I think, a lot of sense for the business organization representing University Avenue as one example. So I know, again, we're at 10 o'clock. Does anybody have any final parting words or comments? Okay. Well, hopefully this is just the beginning of our conversations with you, and we can continue this onward. And please do look to us and our members for some support and assistance with implementing this plan.
Thanks for presenting.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.